Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. About 35 miles due south of Bangor, Maine, lies Shields Island, a potato-shaped landmass just under 2 miles long and about a mile wide, covering roughly 940 acres. At its northern tip, a land bridge connects it to mainland Maine. For years, it remained one of the last unpopulated spots along the Maine coast, fiercely protected by birdwatchers and wildlife enthusiasts. Meanwhile, the state government eyed the island greedily, always wondering how to profit from it. That all changed when an old law office in Bangor finally opened a locked box that had sat untouched for exactly 100 years, from 1910 to 2010. Inside were the keys to a long-term storage unit and a deed from the government granting Shields Island to Julian Shields and his descendants forever, signed by the president himself. Immediately, a search began to find a living descendant of Julian Shields. That's where I come in. I'm Harvey Paxton, from the Fox Valley area in northeast Illinois. The Paxtons and Shields families have been intertwined for generations, along with a few others, like Aunt Ruth's line and my Uncle Jack Frazier's. Old Asher Shields settled near Robroy Creek around 1813, starting as a dugout dweller before becoming a gentleman farmer. Family legend says things went downhill after that. My cousin Jane traced her ancestry to a Revolutionary War Army captain and earned her place in the DAR, the snottiest, most insufferable group you could find. But when someone dug into the DAR's bloodlines, they found me, purportedly the closest living male relative. Not being one for adventure, I was quietly sliding into the slow decline called old age, until everything changed. One day, I got a certified letter at work, something completely new for me, that I had to sign for personally. Inside was a first-class ticket to Bangor, Maine, a prepaid 3-day hotel stay, and a letter of introduction from the firm Price, Smith & Bolt, requesting I appear at their office at 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday, March 5th. I shrugged and thought, why not? Then I showed the letter to my boss to arrange time off. I had enough savings to make the trip without worry. I packed my one good suit in a hardshell suitcase, grabbed a paperback and some tea for the hotel room. Early March on the East Coast would be cold. I was ready. Equipped with my suitcase, a small courier bag containing a laptop and my birth certificate, I took the train into Chicago's Union Station. I found out which subway line to take to get to O'Hare Airport and spent a boring hour-plus in transit. I made it through the grope line without punching anyone. I'm a white-knuckles flyer but made it to Earth again. Wonder of wonders, my suitcase made it to the same destination. A taxi took me to Epic Sports Gear where I bought a decent pocket knife and a warm, packable goose-down jacket, then proceeded to backtrack to the 4 Points Sheraton near the airport. I was impressed with their registration process and the room which I was assigned. I was shown to a better quality room on the side away from the airport, so the sounds of the jets wouldn't be continuously screaming in the background. Being on the 5th floor meant the traffic noise was abated as well. The hotel restaurant did a reasonable job on my grilled salmon supper. The fact that the meal was comped into my hotel bill made it even more palatable. I'd brought a bottle of bourbon in my luggage. A little ice and water set me up a lot cheaper than the room minibar or the hotel penthouse bar would have. I watched a movie on HBO, had a couple of drinks, and rolled over into sleep for the night. My little camping alarm clock woke me an hour early for me, that is. Bangor is an hour ahead of Chicago. I rose, washed and dressed. Breakfast was on in the restaurant. I stuck with hash browns and eggs with a hot tea. At 8:45 I had the front desk call for a cab. By 9:20, I was on the steps of the address noted in the letter. At the indicated time, I was brought into an office in which 3 men sat across the table from the single seat available. This was looking a bit adversarial. They had acquired quite a few old family photographs. A computer had been used to create an averaged profile of their features. Then a guy with calipers measured my face. They got a very good match. My birth certificate was authenticated. After all that, we got down to business. As the closest male descendant of the line, I was to inherit an island if I performed certain tasks. An elderly gentleman read aloud from the contract laid out over 100 years before. The heir would only be granted ownership and access to the funds under management if an impressive home was raised on the site of the original homestead and was occupied by said heir for a period of 1 full year. The princely sum of $30,000 was to have been set aside when the contract was drawn up. Its purpose was to grant said heir the funds to construct their home. Occupancy was to begin within 3 months of the reading of the contract. He laid down the paper. I'd been shot down before I even left the runway. My disenchantment must have shown. Not much in today's terms, is it? Nope. I might get it done for 5 times that. depending on what's available. You're in luck, he said in a dry tone of voice. It went into an interest-bearing account at 5% compound interest. The account balance is currently just over $4.4 million. Holy Christ, I exclaimed. I sat back in the chair and thought about what was involved. Services would have to be run. I'd seen the lawyer's aerial photograph. The road was gravel and devastated by washouts. It would have to be dug out, properly filled in, and paved. Hopefully, all the services could be run parallel to the road, beneath the surface. The island was considered by many to be a wildlife refuge. There was no sense in rocking the boat unnecessarily. Besides, buried services should be relatively weatherproof. Coastal Maine wasn't known for easy winters. For that reason, I wouldn't put in a sewage field either. Instead, I'd use a big septic tank. I'd seen a museum that was built of pre-stressed hollow-core concrete slabs. It looked quite striking with all the vertical elements. A series of clustery windows just below the roof line would add to the look. I recalled looking into the strength and limitations of the construction technique. A shed-style roof with the highest edge towards the south should yield good internal illumination. A couple diffuse spotlights illuminating the front of the building would hopefully make the place impressive enough to satisfy the lawyers that were administering this contract. I stopped staring out into space and focused on the old man. I'll need access to an architect with experience in pre-stressed hollow-core concrete slab construction. He or she must have working relationships with a civil contractor to get the road upgraded, a mechanical engineer to check the loads and waterproofing of this type of home construction, and a general contractor that has good quality subs in electrical, plumbing, heating, and concrete work. I need this within 24 hours. To save money, I'd like to rent a small house in town, as living in a hotel for several months would prove expensive and tedious. Please arrange for something. I'll need access to the building funds quite soon, as I'll need capital to rent a dwelling, hire and bond the architect, get the road building underway, get the utilities run, and to purchase a vehicle. If the place is to be impressive, I'll also need the services of an interior decorator. I have certain constraints under which they must labor, as I will be the one living there, not them. The old man was smiling. I'm glad that you're taking the bit in your teeth, young man. I'll get my firm right on it. The rest of his team was sitting there, obviously in shock. We agreed to meet the next morning, same time, same place. We shook hands and I left. This was the chance of a lifetime, and it had fallen into my lap like a lightning-struck duck, causing much confusion and smelling up the place from singed feathers. I needed to put paid to my old life so that I could concentrate on what I needed to do in the here and now. I called my ex-boss and told him what had hit me. He called me a lucky scumsucker and asked for my phone and keys. I shipped them back via FedEx. This spawned my next project. I needed a new phone. I bought a dead stupid cell phone. It wasn't a BlackBerry. It wasn't an iPhone. It wasn't an Android. It had caller ID and a large keypad. Next, I called my Illinois apartment's landlord and opened negotiations to break my contract for a minimum fee. I ordered a shipping container to be dropped off at the apartment complex. For $500, the maintenance guys would strip the place for me and pack the goods. When they called to inform me that they were finished, I'd call a shipping agent to have the container sealed and trucked to me. The contents of the chest, freezer, and refrigerator would be up for grabs. Someone was going to get a lot of frozen meat out of the deal. I explicitly described where my firearms were kept and informed them that they were kept loaded. I began making notes about my estate-to-be. Once the road was completed, I wanted a brick barn erected to hold not only the shipping container but the snow removal equipment that I'd need, a stack of firewood, a generator, and a large LP gas tank as well. The old building materials would have to be cleared out from around the job site. Foundations had to be dug and the foundation slabs poured. Depending on what the architect and his or her pet mechanical engineer said, I was thinking about a 130-foot long by 50-foot wide slab on the order of 1 foot thick for the house, and a 30-foot by 60-foot slab for the barn. The pads would have to be suitably reinforced by welded rebar grids. Since pre-stressed hollow-core concrete slabs are made of concrete obviously, and concrete wicks water like crazy, the poured slab and everything making up the shell would have to be meticulously waterproofed to prevent wicking. Saturated concrete disintegrates when frozen, and the local climate ensured many freezing nights come winter. Despite the use of forced air heating and cooling, I'd insist on 2 fireplaces. One small working fireplace equipped with a crane and roaster, positioned at the edge of the kitchen, and one centered within the living room wall. It was to be larger and designed for light, heat, and atmosphere. I would insist on wooden flooring, large overstuffed leather chairs and couches, carpets defining areas of interest, and wall-length bookshelves. I wished the furniture style to be dark mission oak. The design of my new home was approached as a functional process. I defined tasks that I would be confronted with on a day-to-day basis. Then I specified what I would require to either perform those tasks or to present a view or character that I desired. I planned for an office, 3 bedrooms, 1 suite with its own sitting room and bathroom, another huge bathroom nearest the master bedroom, a deep 2+ car garage near the kitchen, and a solarium or conservatory at the other end of the house. The solarium was to have its own heater to enable me to run a separate heating zone efficiently. I specified that a flat cobblestone patio was to be laid between the kitchen and the brick barn, edged by evergreens and thorn hedges. Perhaps, in time, I'd have walls built to further define the edges of the space. I definitely planned on a barbecue area outside the kitchen. I hoped to reserve enough room for 4 or 5 face cords of wood in the brick barn. A wheeled cart would do an admirable job of bringing in both the firewood and groceries. The area was given to ice storms, so I considered installing a local power supply to be prudent. I could afford 2 massive LP gas storage tanks, so I planned on it. I'd need somewhere to keep my garbage, so a small dumpster would have to be leased and hopefully placed within the barn as well. That barn was getting larger with each planning iteration. I sighed, put away my notebook, and crashed for the night. Come morning, I performed my ablutions, dressed, and had a nice steak and egg breakfast to prepare me for the day. Now that we'd met, I dressed more casually for the follow-up meeting. Some hard decisions were coming my way. The local conservationists were a devoted group. They believed that they had certain rights pertaining to the island. My job was to disabuse them of their beliefs or cut a deal that they could live with. The architect that they'd originally selected for me was a fool. He showed me drawings for an unlivable glass box that a dedicated exhibitionist would have trouble with. I fired his, but without a qualm. I called several architects and brought them together the next evening for a brainstorming party. After a lengthy search, I found a picture of the museum that I'd seen. It exhibited the concrete slab architecture that I wanted to use. This I showed around to the prospective architects. One young lady was quietly smiling to herself after viewing my photograph and planning notes. On confronting her, she said, "This is going to be so cool. It's like nothing else around here." I replied, "Yep. I want it to be minimalist, with tall spaces and vertical lines. I want 10-inch thick hollow core precast slab used and 25-foot long members to comprise the front of the building. Recessed spotlights could really improve on the idea. This thing will go up in a flash. The construction adhesive sets up in less than 24 hours and won't even require lag bolts to join the slabs. It will, however, require either supporting arches cast in place or supporting walls. Timber frame style polished, welded steel joists would work as well to support a beam line down the center of the house. That, along with the clerestory windows, would give it an impression much like the inside of a cathedral, with a modern flair added by the shiny, exposed steel undercarriage. Oval tube construction would give plenty of strength and be visually appealing." She had the idea. "I want the garage space cut off at 10 feet high. An exposed stairway on that wall should lead to a nice loft space. I want ceiling fans with lights spaced every 10 feet with a master control. The inside walls should have a lightwood finish such as maple paneling. The outside may require a facade to emphasize the vertical lines. By the way, you're hired. I need occupancy in less than 3 months." She did a little happy dance and bolted out the door. She had plans to draw up and contractors to bind over for the job. I didn't even catch her name. I sighed. I'd had dates like that. It didn't bode well. Within days, a trencher was out cutting soil for the service runs. Electricity, water, phone, and internet lines were laid. The services terminated where the plans required them to. Next, the whole roadbed was dug up and relined with crushed limestone. It was compacted and lined again. For passes gave that road a foundation equal to that of an interstate highway. Then the asphalt top cover was laid on in 2 passes with tarred road felt in between the layers. The resulting road was substantially higher than what had previously been laid. The road camber had been adjusted while rolling it down to promote drainage. The verges were filled in with compressed gravel. I found myself established in a small furnished house for the duration. I was on a month-to-month lease. It was nothing special. It was simply a place to lay my head. I bought a used Subaru Outback with 4-wheel drive and got it insured. I was mobile again. The end loader and dump trucks came to demolish and remove the remains of the old buildings. Under the watchful eye of the architect, a surveying team staked out the slabs. The end loader got busy digging out the footings for the house and the brick barn, as well as digging the hole for the septic tank. Forms went up and beds of gravel went down. The welders framed 2 nests of woven rebar where the slabs were to be poured. Next, the cement trucks came. The floatmen slicked the concrete surfaces while the foreman ensured that the slabs were properly graded. They took time to cure. The septic tank was dropped in place and covered over with a precast concrete cap. The inspectors had been watching and signed off on the foundation. That ended the first 2 weeks. The crane came. Load after load of concrete slab showed up. Teams of men glued up the edges of the slabs and constructed a temporary scaffolding to hold the slabs in place until the adhesive cured. The adhesive used was stronger than the concrete. The outer slabs had a surface treatment that looked as if giant brush strokes had been made along the length of the surfaces. A facade would not be necessary. The brick barn was well underway. Once the walls were up, the welders arrived to install the stainless steel midline support. Next, the wet saw teams came to cut out windows and doorways. Additional slabs were delivered to complete the inner walls, garage roof, and main roof. The wet saw crew returned to finish work on the garage entryways. Then, the entire structure was sprayed with an industrial sealer that penetrated the concrete surface, acting like a primer for drywall. The sealer was applied twice, exceeding code requirements. No further penetrations would be made. All remaining work would use construction adhesive. Finally, the crane left the site. The plumbers plumbed. The HVAC men ran ducts and control lines. Once all the foam insulation and wall studs were glued up, the electricians ran their circuits. Extra data lines were run to support internet connections and speaker installations. Stone masons were called in to build the fireplaces. A call was made for the inspectors to come and sign off, while they could inspect the interiors of the walls as well as the smoke boxes and flues of the chimneys. That finished off the second 2 weeks. The doors, windows, garage doors, walls, wall treatments, and flooring went in. County workers connected the services and installed their service meters. The propane tanks went in, were connected and filled. The heating and air conditioning systems were tested. Trucks arrived with appliances and furnishings. The generator was wired in and tested. The kitchen was built out, as was the bathroom. The extra heating services for the conservatory were tested. A hot tub was plumbed in at one corner of the conservatory behind folding screens. Rugs went down. Furniture was unwrapped and placed. The brick barn and the fireplaces were finished. The shipping container bearing my furnishings was delivered, unpacked, and returned to the leasing company. The inspectors were called again to approve occupancy. They turned knobs, twiddled switches, measured amperages and flow rates, checked exhaust flues, and inspected the septic vault. Seals and penetrations were checked, and all circuits checked for ground, leakage, and continuity. They'd seen pink foam being glued up over everything: walls, ceilings, floors, and interior walls before the wall treatments and floors went on. They were quite happy with the building's R rating. The gas runs had been professionally run, terminated, and protected. The tank spaces were vented. The windows were multi-layer nitrogen-filled and approved for use as a thermal barrier. They checked the hell out of the conservatory because the walls were mostly glass. They, like the other windows, were multi-layer nitrogen-filled units. The halide light circuits were checked, as well as the heat boosters and humidity control. We passed inspection. The third 2 weeks were history. The asphalt contractor was called back in to finish the spans between the driveway, the garage, and the brick barn. A team of specialty landscapers dug out the area between the house and barn, installed a base of sand, and laid down the interlocking pavers. They were unusually thick, I thought, but apparently the climate required their use. They dug channels on either side of the patio and planted flowering thorny orange bushes and a deep screening hedge of arbor vitae outside that. My privacy was assured. I hired 2 guys and a truck to purchase, transport, and stack 6 face cords of split dried oak into the brick barn. I paid everybody off. Finally, I collapsed on one of my new couches for a while and took stock. The place was finished. I needed insurance on the place, but it was habitable and approved by the local building commission. Check. It was furnished and the services were turned on. Check. I had all my crap still in the barn, but that was a work in process. Kinda check. The lawyers had to come by and approve the place. Next check. I needed to stock the pantry. Check off for later. I put on a small party for the architect, head contractor, the interior decorator, and the lawyers. The lawyers approved of the place. It was deemed distinguished and handsome in their words. We sat about the fireplace, sipping decent wine and discussing different choices and trade-offs that I'd made. In the morning, the lawyers released the rest of the construction account to me. I opened a local working account with it, arranged for a debit card and checks, made the post office and emergency services aware of my address. I got a rural delivery box and got a local driver's license. With homeowners insurance, the place got covered for ice, hail, smoke, fire, flood, theft, and acts of aggression. I investigated local ships chandlers to see who had the best reputation. I called the winner and placed a stocking order. It was the second week in April. The occupancy clock had started ticking. The government was still pissed about having the rug yanked out from under their feet. Personally, I didn't have a damn thing to do with it. I was just a victim that got sucked into the jet engine. However, since I was a moving target, I got shot at. I was sued for various things from tax fraud to squatting to theft of government property. They tried to lock off access to my road. I visited the local Menards for a cut-off saw, a plastic face shield, and a little generator. I also bought a 1-gallon plastic dispenser full of gasoline. 1 hour later, the concrete-filled steel post that the lock had been fastened to was history. I regarded all these moves as prime bovine fertilizer. Bullshit. I obtained copies of the deed and the contract from the law firm, hired a young attorney with an attitude, and made a trip to Augusta, the state capital. I made an appointment to speak with the state attorney general along with a rather vocal representative of the Friends of Shields Island. When we paraded through his door, I could see immediately that he wished he were anywhere but in the office that day. I had a plan to bring a smile to his face, but first I had to lay some shit down in the rose garden. Then we might see some blooms. I started off by shaking his hand. Good morning, sir. We've both got a problem because an old contract has triggered a disruption of the status quo. First, let me lay out the paperwork behind all this. I gave him the certified copies of the deed and contract that spawned this devil's mess. He read through it and became increasingly more uncomfortable. Now, the state's position. I laid out the series of lawsuits that I'd been confronted with. My pet tiger of a lawyer started spouting phrases such as spurious suits, defamation, and collusion. Would you agree that these are nuisance suits? He was forced to agree. Before we get too worked up, I have a proposal. I suggest granting the northern half of Shields Island to the Friends of Shields Island, including the camp and jetty. They would be responsible for its upkeep and would receive the profits from it. It will need to be established as a not-for-profit to satisfy government requirements, and the state would have to contribute toward things like road maintenance and storm damage repairs to the water facilities. This should appease the most vocal interest group and gain public support. Any state legislative objections should be addressed by the wording of the deed and contract before you, or by what I've proposed. What do you think? He called in his team to talk it over. The woman from the Friends was beaming at me. I just proposed to give her back her pet project. I let her know that I was proposing to fence off my half of the island and populate it with large dogs and deer. Some areas would have to be cleaned up and seeded in high-protein fodder for the deer, or they'd starve. I requested that a long-term limited hunting license scheme be implemented in the coming years to keep from decimating the herd, yet keep its numbers under control. I informed her of my plans to raise chickens and plant a large family garden. I proposed to her that a limited number of family garden plots might be leased out on a yearly basis to city dwellers. I was going to purchase a tractor with an end-loader attachment and a deep cultivator for my own use. I could probably be wheedled into preparing a few garden plots each spring for them. Oh, and the old coppice-woods would be cut down, the root systems dug out, the soil deep fertilized, and the woods replanted. A few small orchards would also be planted. I was considering a pioneer village and blacksmithy to be built and operated during the late spring to fall seasons. I'm afraid that I pushed the poor woman in over her head. She'd get back to me. Right. The Attorney General talked the Chief Justice into having the suits dismissed with prejudice so that they could not be reopened. A simple contract for the donation of the park lands was drawn up with riders for maintenance and guaranteed access. I paid my lawyer $10,000 for the morning's work, accepted a business card from the Shields Island lady, and headed out, satisfied with a job well done. I had a bit of shopping to do. I found a big box store that would deliver and install a small home theater system for me. I visited a John Deere retailer to pick up brochures and get prices on a tractor and various implements. I wanted a hydraulic wood splitter, a PV, and a chainsaw right away. I bought a mixer and a food scale for baking. I ordered a fairly large pressure washer and a utility cart to be delivered. As I noted before, I needed something to move the firewood and groceries from the barn to the house. I also bought a nice big Weber grill for use in pleasant weather. Likewise, for warm weather, I wanted a clothesline set up and a bag of pins. I'd use the dryer when the rains or snow came. I bought various soaps and cleaning supplies and a long wire antenna for my tuner so that I could pick up the local radio stations. I'd run it out the office window and across the back north wall so that it picked up radio stations from Bangor, the nearest large city. Last, I bought cases of rum, bourbon, vodka, and beer. The car was pretty full by the time I headed home. I spent the next month moving stuff out of the barn and into the house, arranging the kitchen, putting my books onto shelves, preparing for winter on the seacoast, and generally getting used to the place. I bought a pair of field boots. Previously all I had were city shoes, and tramping around in sneakers just wasn't prudent. I found out where several disused field borders lay by spotting the stone fences. The fields could be reconditioned and planted in fodder such as clover or commercial high-protein mix. The birds would benefit, as well as the deer. Once I'd identified the old field roads, I could clear a few to get my tractor in and out of them. I noted on a hand-drawn map where low-lying areas were that would profit from brush piles for deer bedding sites. That's where I'd pile the scrub that I cut down. I spotted a couple places for blackberry canes, plum, pear, apple, and walnut orchards. I tried to keep everything together. The hen house should be placed close to the garden so that the chickens could be turned out into the crops to eat bugs. A second brick barn was planned for feed storage, a small gas forge, and workspaces. It was a very busy map. I kept the master copy pinned to the wall in my office. I had over 400 acres to play with and planned to make the best of all of them, with care to not upset the lowlands. I bought a mid-sized John Deere tractor and a two-wheeled cart to haul behind it. The loader, mower, and snowblade were usually stored in the barn. I kept the tractor in the garage as it was heated. Starting a diesel engine in below freezing conditions was beyond my acceptable level of patience. I researched large dog breeds. The documentation suggested that both German Shepherds and Newfoundlands were large, cold-tolerant dogs that should easily coexist with each other and deer. Before I bought any pups, I'd need to build a heated doghouse or two. I'd have to talk to a local vet about sane preparation for the puppies and how to obtain young deer. The property fence would have to go up before those plans went forward. I envisioned a black phosphor-coated woven wire fence 10 feet tall and tied into the ground, from shoreline to shoreline. I wanted a remote-controlled gate installed and an alarm installed to let me know if anyone turned off onto my access road. A camera at the gate should let me know who or what wanted in. A fierce mid-October ice storm followed by high winds took out my county-fed electric. Then the storm's surge wiped out the road. It cut a hole through the land spit that supported the road. There would be no going to town for coffee and a newspaper for a while. It proved to me that I needed a powerboat for emergencies. The big question was, where could I shelter it? I had plenty of propane to keep the generator running, as well as all I'd need for cooking and heating, but the experience demonstrated to me how vulnerable I was. I could go perhaps 6 months without external support before I ran out of fuel, food, or patience. And booze grin. A phone call to my local civil contractor gave me a definite time frame for getting the road repaired. I spent the next 3 weeks of forced isolation finishing off finding storage space for the pile of possessions that I'd had shipped in from Illinois. There was a brand new futon couch somewhere under that mess, as well as all the components necessary to build out a small electronics lab. I wanted to repurpose a guest bedroom for the lab. It was dangerous to have in a multi-purpose room. You see, when populating a circuit board, it's natural to snip off the excess length of leads on the components. Those little bits of wire tend to fly amazing distances. The ends are sharp, like little chisels. One does not walk around barefoot near an electronics bench without getting perforated feet. Rugs and carpeting are out of the question, both to limit hiding places for the bits of sharp wire and to eliminate static charges in the winter that blow out those dinky little chips you're trying to get to work in concert. Once I drilled through the windowsill in the new lab, I used a water hose and lots of water to drive a copper rod into the soil next to the foundation to provide an earth ground. I also hung several antennas. I didn't have a ham license because all my previous dwellings were apartments, and I was funny about doing it right, or at least my vision of right, when setting up my antennas. I sent away for the latest ARRL yearbook and their approved license study guides. Nebraska Sales and Surplus had the components I needed to make an excellent antenna matchbox. I had to buy new bottles of styrene doping compound because my old bottles had solidified in storage. Styrene syrup hardens to something like epoxy putty. It's used to keep things like windings on coils from moving about and changing values on you. Think of it as industrial-strength fingernail polish. I wondered how they were going to deliver it to me. By airdrop? I made a few oddball dishes from things I had in storage, such as fruitcake, lasagna, meatloaf, and dried apple pie. I spent some quality time with my library. I realized that I was missing a library table and chairs as well as a kitchen table and chairs. All I had was a small table and chair near the shelved cookbooks that I also used as a dinner table. I placed a call to my interior decorator to remedy this. My cable TV and internet went out. They were hosted on the same buried cable. I made plans to have the thing rerun with some protection. It was to be encased in a pipe that was attached to concrete footings. I wanted the power line run in a similar but separate armored cover. Electric lines and data lines do not favorably coexist with each other, either by electrical code or in reality. This technique should ease any future installation of data fiber whenever it hit the area. I also made plans to have rubble-filled giant synthetic bags dropped in place to restrict further storm erosion. It should provide a cheap yet effective seawall. I spent some time in the woods with my chainsaw cutting down the saplings and trees that had grown up in the roadbeds that I planned to use. The bushes and such that I left could easily be ground down to mulch with the tractor-mounted mower. It was pleasant to be outside in the quiet. I was beginning to truly appreciate the gift that I had been given. Quiet is something that you can't buy. In the cold, still air of wintertime, you can hear cars moving and house doors slamming over a mile away. Trains can be heard for 5 to 12 miles. Finding a place that was immune to all that was a true treasure. It was bad enough that I had to temporarily put up with the constant drone of the generator. The time passed quickly enough, but it was still a surprise when the truck came up my driveway and parked in front of the house. I welcomed the men in and made a fresh pot of coffee. The road was complete and properly patched at that. I talked to them about getting the seawall constructed and relaying my power and data cables with armor and footings. They were amenable to take on the job, but had to discuss pricing with their subcontractors. I had no problem with this and gave a tentative go-ahead to at least implement a design and determine a price. I told them that an economical way to do it may involve a post-hole auger on the back of a tractor to dig the footings, and I'd witnessed fiberboard tubes used as forms for footings in multi-story office buildings. All I could think of to keep it from going ahead was the depth at which they'd be working. They'd have to find extensions for the post-hole driller. I received a phone call stating a price. I gave them the go-ahead and they ran with it. Within 2 months, I had my electricity and internet back. The seawall took a little longer as the weather had packed in for the winter. However, once it was finished, I was assured that little would cause a repeat of the damage caused by October's storm. I spent a pleasant Christmas, if quiet. I'd hoped that this would be my last Christmas spent in isolation. My tables and chairs had arrived. It all looked quite nice together, and the furniture was comfortable enough. They all matched, so they could be combined into one long service for a dinner. Yet, something was off. Something was missing. I realized that there was no mantel clock. The place wouldn't be complete without a few kerosene lanterns and a mantel clock ticking away, chiming out the hours. I spent some time arranging for 4 Aladdin kerosene lanterns, 1 for the library table, 2 for the mantel, and 1 for my bedroom. No closets had been included in the building plans. I had a good carpenter make 4 bachelor's chest of drawers for sturdy beds, for bedside stands, and 4 clothes presses, i.e. standing closets. I had the interior decorator find me 5 blanket chests to put at the foot of each bed and 1 near the front door to sit on while pulling your boots on and off. The 4th bedroom, or lab, got a desk, a set of bookshelves, and a comfortable chair, as did the office. While the ground was frozen, I used the tractor to drag the trees I'd cut to the areas I'd set aside as mangers for the deer. It was several weeks of hard work in the cold before I was satisfied. The tractor would easily traverse the old roadbeds despite the stumps if I kept the speed down. Nobody but a madman with a death wish races around any fields in a tractor. They have turned over and crushed many an unsuspecting farmer doing simple things such as plowing or baling. Farm injuries and deaths are one of those nasty little secrets that people don't mention. Are they industrial accidents? Are they home accidents? Well, yes to both. But your home probably doesn't have a machine designed to cut off, suck in, and finely chop tough stalks half the size of your forearm either. Look up a silage knife or silage chopper. With nothing to really do, I started thinking about second and third order effects of what I proposed to accomplish here. For example, if I planted a large garden, then I'd have to fertilize and prepare the soil, pre-plant some seeds for seedlings in the conservatory, plant the seeds and seedlings, then care for the garden, feeding, watering, and protecting it from the depredations of hungry animals. Sure, fencing helps, but deer jump better than any Olympic pole vaulter on their best day. A deer jumping 16 feet is no big deal. That's pretty hard to defend against. Shooting the critters is the only reliable option that I could think of, as scent baits sometimes work and sometimes don't. All right, now I've got a few deer carcasses. What do I do with them? Butcher them, obviously. A commercial butcher would report the carcasses as taken without tags. A big no-no, and Mr. Sheriff would not be my friend. Alternatively, I'd have to build a slaughterhouse and a smokehouse, learn some butchery skill, cure, and smoke the meat. That's not a bad outcome if you like venison, and I happen to like it. All right, your garden is going great guns. You have to water and weed it regularly. Once the crops begin to ripen, you've got to harvest them. Some, such as tomatoes, you harvest regularly until frost kills the plant. For God's sakes, don't plant zucchini without filing an ecological impact waiver. Root vegetables such as potatoes and carrots are one-shot harvest investments. The potatoes can stay in the ground until the vines are dead, along with the turnips. Onions, garlic, lettuce, cucumbers, peppers, radishes, and other soft crops have to come in when they're ripe, and can come in all at once. The catch, 22, is that they taste the best when harvested the closest to peak ripeness that you can achieve, which leaves a truly minimal window to get everything picked, washed, and processed. You've made the investment in time and trouble to get the crops on the table. You can't eat them all at once, so it's time to preserve them. Drying, canning, and selling or trading them come to mind. Then you still need to dig up the potatoes, turnips, and whatever else is left in the ground, such as horseradish, before the ground freezes into something like concrete. Again, more time, more preparation, and more storage are needed. You'll want a root cellar to store all your canned tomatoes and such, as well as provide dry sand piles to store your onions, potatoes, turnips, horseradish, and carrots. Now, figure out the time investment in each crop and add them together. Are there enough hours in the day? Sure as hell not for one person. Add to this the maintenance tasks around the farm and caring for any chickens or pigs. You'll never retire. You'll die in your tracks, and they'll dig a hole, roll you over, and cover up what's left of you. There'll be one hell of a feast at your wake, though. Think of all that food you've put away for the occasion. On the other hand, we can get others to help. No, I'm not going to marry a woman with kids just to provide free labor. The kids would probably mutiny and run away anyway. This is a historical site. There aren't that many reenactment villages around. They're all further south where the documented forts and villages are. A conscientious contractor could no doubt reproduce a period blacksmithy. I myself could dig and lay a proper root cellar. I'd want to use unfinished sawmill cut timbers, though. The whole thing probably should be set up at some distance from the house, just to keep my privacy. A couple of the old fields could no doubt be repurposed as a parking lot, and a small village, such as an estate, would generate. This was somewhat typical until around 1914, when the world changed. Mules were everyone's tractors. We could cheat and use the John Deere and its attachments to plow, fertilize, seed, cut and harvest the hay, which we'd need to feed the mules and any cattle we'd raise. I preferred not to get into any sort of dairy operation because it was so labor-intensive. The television show The Movable Feast used professional cooks in mobile kitchens to cook food from local farmers and fishermen. We could showcase the garden and have people help care for it. We couldn't use wire fencing, though. It was too modern. We couldn't use tires for potato hills. Wooden barrels with the ends knocked out would have to do. We'd have to hire a few reenactors and lecturers, a stableman, and a blacksmith with experience as a farrier to keep the mules in shoes. I could still have my smokehouse. We could kill a pig or two a year and raise a steer or two for meat. We could demonstrate different skills performed on every farm, such as soap making, candle making, and weaving. Local historical societies and universities may help out as well. It would all have to be carefully advertised throughout the U.S. Despite the recent downturn in rendezvous participation, we may be able to arrange a small one. A grove would have to be prepared with grass seed and left to fill in for a year or two first, and an accessible well dug for the reenactors. We could rent portisans and a dumpster, no problem. There were local sawmills, and their scrap would provide excellent firewood for the camp. What they didn't use would visit my fireplace. The only big hit that I could figure out was insurance, for fire, hospitalization, and liability. It was possible that the insurance necessary for the establishment and operation of a pioneer village could be extended to cover a rendezvous. This all existed in the same reality as a fever dream, of course, until I got the deed in my hands. The fence, dogs, and deer were as far as I could go. As if it all went south, these things could be either adapted or abandoned. I just put in a little garden the first year to satisfy my craving for fresh tomatoes and salads. The smokehouse? Well, okay. I'd build the smokehouse and a root cellar as well as do some reading before spring came. My local sawmill did have an old rotary cutting line, but it was only used for big mortise and tenon beams. I got a price on 12-foot-long 10x10s and 10-foot-long rough-sawn planks, 2 inches thick and 10 inches wide. I bought lumber for the footers, cap rails, trusses, door, and stretchers to support the shingles. Someone around here had to be making riven shingles. If all else failed, I would ship them in from out of state. I had a blacksmith make the hinges and latch. My contractor provided the labor to set up the 10-foot-deep by 20-foot-long smokehouse. I set up the shelves in 2 rows, 2 feet deep, by 4 rows high, in duckboard fashion. Wide slots in the shelves would let the smoke penetrate from below. I bought wire trays to support jerky and small meat on the shelves, as well as hooks to go over a beam to support quarters of meat. I bought wash tubs and pickling salt. That pretty much exhausted my knowledge of preserving and smoking meat. Next, I bought a book on charcuterie, the art and science of butchery and meat preservation. After reading that, I knew that I'd need a block and tackle, a gambrel, some good knives, rubber gloves, a waterproof apron, and a plastic wheelbarrow. Butchery was a messy business. I bought a powerful portable air conditioner that fed chilled air through a 6-inch flexible tube. I cut a matching hole high in the side of the smokehouse so that I could chill the meat in the summer. The same hole could later be used to support the smoker. A water line was run from the house, through the brick barn, and out the other side to provide water to the butchering station. I made damn sure that I knew how to close off and drain that line before the fall freeze hit. That task went on my September checklist. Late February, the damnedest thing happened. Someone tried to shoot me. They were pretty stupid about it, I must say. I heard the reports and spang noises off the front of the house. I wasn't about to stick my head out there and get it shot off. I looked through the window and spotted a boat out on the water, a few hundred feet away. I'm not Johnny Rambo. I didn't go all ghillie suit and try to sneak up on him. I called the Coast Guard to come and arrest their butts. Well, I tried to. The cell tower was down. This was getting serious. I'd been fooling around with internet phones before I moved. I'd purchased a Skype account and had a headset with a microphone on my computer. I started calling around to get bloody anyone to answer. I got a fish market to pick up, just down the coast in Belfast. I asked him to call the coasties as someone was trying to shoot my butt. He took down my Skype number and promised to call it in right away. Pretty soon I got an incoming call. It wasn't the Coast Guard, but it was the next best thing, the state police. I described what was happening, including the fact that my cell phone service was down. They wanted to know the registration numbers on the boat. I had a spotting scope that had seen better days in my office. I laid it on the window casing for stability and took a look. I got MERJ, then the trees blocked the rest. I told the nice man what I'd seen and verified that they were still shooting at my place. They thanked me and said someone would be right out. Not 40 minutes later, a coastie smuggling interceptor laid a line of machine gun bullets before the bow of the boat, the one that had been using my place for target practice. I wandered down to the beach and yelled out, "Don't kill the scumsuckers yet. They haven't paid to have the bullet holes in my house fixed." I got a wave and watched some guys get handcuffed. I wrote down the full boat registration number when I got back to the house. I called the fish market that had helped me out and told him what happened, and then thanked him again. Guess where I was going to buy my fresh fish from then on? It turned out that the guys that were shooting at me were worried that I'd catch him brewing their moonshine on my place and turn him in. Hell, they got in more trouble for disabling the cell tower than for shooting at me. I took the bill for fixing the bullet holes, all $4,000 of it, and turned it over to a lawyer. I didn't care what he made. I just wanted my $4,000 back out of it. He took it on. If this was what life in Maine was like, the next time I was going to be able to shoot back, by God. I paid a visit to a gun shop where I looked over his stock in trade. I bought a brand spanking new Savage Deer rifle in 30.06, a very good low-light scope that cost half as much as the rifle and 600 rounds of new ammunition. I spent $1,000 for the rifle, scope, and ammunition. To address the issue of intruders inside the house or barn, I bought a Remington pump-action shotgun and had a laser mounted under the barrel. If I could see it, I could hit it. I took to wandering around the property, looking for old foundations. I knew that sooner or later I'd find their damned still. I mapped out all the open foundations and cellars. I wanted to get them filled in all over the island, not just in my part. They were dangerous, not only from falls, but they'd make great nests for snakes. Falling into a writhing nest of cottonmouths or rattlesnakes would be a pretty hard way to go. I found the still. It was a pretty sweet setup, and I could see why they'd been put out about having to abandon it. They'd found a stream and followed it up the flow in a flat-bottomed boat until they found the remains of a collapsed house. The old farmers had been pretty smart. They didn't build near the beach because the winter weather would tear up their homes. Instead, they followed the creeks upstream and used them as their driveways. They'd have good sweet water and an easy egress. The creek gave the moonshiners an easy way to get the grain and sugar in and the finished product out. I practiced a bit on their still with my new shotgun, then took a picture for the newspaper. I'd accompany that photo with a short note, a photocopy of the repair bill, and a picture of my shot-up house. If I had my say about things, the Sandersons' name was mud. I may have pissed off a few of the older gentlemen around the area with my restraint of trade, but tough shit. When somebody shoots at me, the gloves come off. I let my contractor know about 3 new jobs I had for him. I turned him loose on filling in the cellars and building the fence. The contract I had drawn up with the Friends of Shields Island didn't really define the division point where the fence would lie. It did specify that the jetty and campground were on their half. That defined one terminus of a diagonal line running west-southwest to east-northeast. I gave them a 1/4 mile south of the park for aesthetics. I asked that the contractor wiggle the fence line around a bit to avoid cutting as many trees as they could, but I knew that they'd have to clear a path the width of the island that they could run a truck over. Once finished, I approved of the fence's look. The dark phosphate-coated fence disappeared against the woods. The place was posted no hunting and no trespassing. In keeping with my minimally invasive principles, the contractor used a helicopter to dump loads of dirt into the open cellars until they met or exceeded the local ground level. It was a nice job. Next, I had 2 dog mangers built out of brick, connected to the first barn. I asked that doggy pass-throughs be opened up between the mangers and the inside of the barn, and between the barn and the enclosed backyard. Hopefully, they'd have a place to play in out of the wind and weather. If they started crapping indoors, I'd just have to power wash the area with a bleach solution. That should descent the area and discourage them. The vet had the names of a couple of dog breeders which were raising bloodlines with minimal hip dysplasia or cataracts. The spring puppies would be ready to go near Easter, just after the 3rd week in April. The state was willing to provide a couple dozen young roe deer to establish a new breeding colony. I had to get the seed for the fodder in the ground yet, so early August was the soonest that I'd be able to accept delivery. I got the clover, inoculate, and protein seed mix on order. I'd need a hay loft for feeding the deer next winter. I notified my contractor that I'd need a larger brick barn with a hay loft erected in a field across the island. It was a good time to start as the ground was still frozen and a small cat bulldozer could easily dig out the foundations, dig a root cellar, as well as grade and clear the old roads and fields that I'd be seeding. Crap. I had yet to order an industrial-sized rototiller to haul behind the tractor. The soil needed to be mixed, broken up, and prepared for seeding. I planned to cast the seed by hand. It was a busy spring. I raised the temperature in the greenhouse and started my tomato sprouts about the third week in March. That should give me 6 weeks to get the seedlings ready. My first year I planned to raise tomatoes, celery, lettuce, radishes, cucumbers, potatoes, carrots, and baby watermelon. Since it was pre-season, I got a good price on 3 dump truck loads of well-rotted peat moss. I spread it over the garden and dug it in just before fencing the garden plot. Once the second barn was up, I'd have another bulk LP gas tank put in, shelves, counters, and a stove. We'd need someplace to can the tomatoes and such. I needed to buy canning supplies and a big rectangular water boiler to put on top of the stove. I ordered the posts and slab wood for the root cellar. I had the contractor spread a foot of sand under the whole thing before they began laying the planks. The door faced north to keep down the heat. Once it was finished, I covered the whole thing with visqueen, 8 inches of pea gravel, and 2.5 more feet of sandy soil. I'd cover it in big rocks and grass, seed once the spring growing season got going. The garden and barn were established in a field about a half-mile from the house. That's only about 2,000 feet. I had 470 acres to work with, and that's less than a square mile. Most of the land was not suitable for crops. Considering the house, the barns, road building, the seawall, all the clearing and construction, the equipment purchases, and the utilities, I'd spent just over $1.5 million getting the place into a condition where I had the illusion of self-sufficiency. 2 steer per year and a flock of chickens would fill out most of my dietary needs. I changed my mind. Rather than investing in further machinery, such as a sickle bar hay cutter, a windrow rake, a baler, and hay wagons, I was going to try to buy the hay pre-baled. It meant less equipment that I'd have to store and maintain. I'd need grain and rough ground seashell for the chickens to eat, and some grain for the beef each week to keep them healthy. I'd have concrete mangers poured for the beef. Demand watering systems were easy to install. Both the chickens and the beef would require heaters over the winter. Corncob bedding would do well for the beef. I'd need straw or hay for the chicken bedding. The tractor and bucket would ensure that I'd never have to shovel cow shit by hand. I'd had enough of that as a kid. Once a season, I'd have to chase out the chickens and clean out the hen house. You wear a mask, a pitchfork, and a big fan. I could see spending $30,000 a year on utilities, food I didn't grow, fuel, replacement stock, property tax, and insurance. Now double that because I was going to hire a live-in cook housekeeper. I'd have to keep the tractor in the second, heated barn to make room in the garage for the housekeeper's car. I suppose the tool shed and tractor implements should go there as well. After all, the tractor would get its daily workout there taking care of the cattle's waste products. I went into town to top off the food, buy a laser printer, toner, and paper, as well as stop by the contractor's office to add on a few things such as electricity, water, heating, a granary, and a couple of concrete cattle mangers. I was getting tired of thinking, damn it. I went home and did nothing but putter around and water the tomatoes for a couple weeks. It was the late winter bloss. Soon I got some energy back. I spent some quality time with my computer writing up a timeline describing what I'd accomplished in the last year, including photocopies of the bills and pictures of the results. Then I listed what I'd planned to accomplish in the next 3 months, then the next 3 months after that. I put together a list of both unique and repeating expenses projecting out a year. The liquid propane cost was hard to quantify, as I had no idea what it would cost to heat the second barn. The weather would play a big part in the demand. I put in a formal request with the county assessor's office to value an acre of land on the island as undeveloped, developed as part of a homestead, and as a fully developed trailer park. I had a couple aerial pictures taken of the island and dug out the surveyor's report. All this served to prove what acreage I had under development and what not. This influenced my property tax and inheritance tax valuations. I took all this documentation to the lawyer's office and got them busy preparing my federal and state income tax returns. Since I'd granted half the island to a not-for-profit, almost all of my capital gains were balanced out. My roe deer project and expected expenses would help on next year's return. They took advantage of an old homestead exemption that was still on the books. After all the smoke cleared, I got a refund. My enforced year of residence was at an end. I wasn't going to leave. Far from it. I intended to stay on the place, do a bit of farming, get some reenactors running around to teach the kids something on their field trips, and continue writing. I dropped my extended documentation on the table in front of Mr. Bolt, the old codger that was involved with my case from Price, Smith, and Bolt. He thumbed through it, taking in the costs and the results of the improvements. He nodded here and there and raised an eyebrow at a couple of other things. I think he found the pictures of the bullet holes and the 30.06 calories rifle purchase. He carefully looked through the projected budget numbers. He smiled as he closed the binder. I'd grant you a long-term note on the strength of this documentation. I'm happy to say you won't need it. He eased back from the table and dropped the heels of his shoes on the polished surface as he grinned like a badger. With his hands clasped across his belly, he said, "You've fulfilled all the conditions in the contract, both open and hidden. Your time analysis on a subsistence farm garden should be written up and used in courses documenting early American life. I'm prepared to close out the contract, giving you access to the rest of the funds and the materials held in our vaults here on the premises." He dropped his shoes back to the floor and slid a folder across the table to me. Within was a bank account number with a long string of digits after it. "What's this?" "The access code." He grinned like crazy. "Nope, that's the balance. Including 2 decimals, there were 13 digits. The 2 leftmost digits were 1 and 6. I had tunnel vision. My face must have been white. He was handing me over $10 billion. Jesus Christ on a pogo stick. What? I think that I short-circuited. Someone handed me a glass of ice water. I drank most of it and started breathing again. The first thing that I said was, "All right, where's Alan Funt?" He gave me a quizzical look. "Alan Funt? Yeah, you know." "Smile? You're on candid camera. That Alan Funt." "Oh no. This is no joke. This is your investment account, sir. It seems that your benefactor, Carling Shields, was a rail baron of the time. He leased out the farms of the island for income, yet did not live there. He established an account with an initial balance of $175,000, compounded monthly. As you can see, it has grown like a weed on a manure pile. Sir, imagine that. With great funding comes nobility. All right, I'm hiring you bunch to get it invested and annually audited. I require $10 million to be reserved as liquid capital. The liquid capital fund is to be brought back to a balance of $10 million on a yearly basis, this anniversary date. The rest is to be invested within certain parameters, such as no investments in Monsanto, Philip Morris, British Petroleum, anything to do with oil sands, and anything to do with any company that has been involved in ecological disasters that have not been cleaned up, such as oil drilling, mine tailings, toxic lakes, or chemical disasters, for example, Bhopal, India. One further thing. I wish you to begin evaluating your market gains against a straight purchase of gold, either in a tradable species such as Krugerrands or in gold bullion. He nodded. Yes, sir. Ecological awareness and responsibility with a running analysis as to gold prices versus our earnings. That should cover your intent. I nodded. Yes. Very good. See what you can do to limit our capital gains tax vulnerability for next 20 years. If the fund is covered under a corporate mantle, perhaps we can arrange to be taxed only on the liquid account, taking it as a profit. He perked up. This was right up his alley. Now, let's talk about emergency craft. I was marooned out there when the road was cut off for 3 weeks. Nothing bad happened, but if there had been a medical emergency, it could have gone quite badly. I want that seawall strengthened, as well as another one constructed on the other side of the causeway. I want a bay cut into the island near my house, and a hefty 30-foot powerboat or hovercraft docked there. I want a team to perform monthly maintenance and dry dock it each fall before ice in, supported in such a fashion that one man, myself, could easily put it into operation and get out of there. I want you to anonymously fund a Flight for Life helicopter ambulance service out of Shieldsport. That should be sufficient to evacuate both myself and anyone at the recreational park in the event of anything really bad happening. I'm going to keep a low profile. Otherwise, I'd never be left alone. I'm going to get the dogs I've looked at. I'm going to be slightly profligate, however. I'm going to have someone else do the plowing and seeding of the fodder patches and grassy valleys that I've planned for a rendezvous site. I need a LLC initiated for the property so that I can continue to implement a small pioneer village and fulfill the demands made by various schools in the area for a field trip site. I'd like all this paid for from the liquid account that I proposed today. Yes, sir, he replied as he madly scribbled on his legal pad. My, that went well. I looked at the rest of the documents in the folder. There seemed to be an inventory there. I slid that sheet of paper back to Mr. Bolt and cocked my head. These are goods held in trust for whosoever fulfilled the contract. They're yours. I had no idea what I was in for. I asked that they be trucked to my home, where I'd take my time taking things apart. I stopped at the first diner coffee shop that I found. A bit of a diatribe here. I've been searching for the best pumpkin pie, the best hamburger, the best sirloin steak, and the best pizza throughout my life. Every time I came upon a new place, I resolved to give it every opportunity to excel. I greeted the waitress with a smile and ordered a cup of coffee with cream and sugar, along with a slice of pumpkin pie. One thing in its favor, It was served at room temperature, not cold. It had a pleasant, spicy aroma without being overwhelming. I cut a bite and took a taste. This wasn't just pumpkin pie. It was more like pumpkin cheesecake. Sweet, moist, and full of flavor. I closed my eyes and smiled as I savored it. The crust was buttery and wonderful, with no lingering aftertaste. When I opened my eyes, I noticed the waitress watching me and smiling. I said, "I'm in Lviv." She smiled a bit wider. "We get that a lot." I got a wild hair up my fanny. "Do you sell these pies as carry-out?" "Nope. Sorry. We don't have the production space." I reached for my checkbook. I was about to do Bangor, Maine an immense favor. "How much do you need to expand?" "Mixers, ovens, holding boxes, forms, tables, real estate, what?" I obviously caught her with her panties down. She yelled towards the back, "Hey, Clara, get up here." After a skinny little red-headed woman appeared, my waitress pointed towards me with her thumb. "Talk business with the man." I smiled at her, hoping to put her at ease. "You've got the best pumpkin cheesecake I've ever tasted. Your friend says that you don't have or can't get the capital to expand. I'm willing to front you a 5-year loan at 1% with no front-end or back-end loading to expand your business for carry-out cheesecakes. You're going to need staff as well, so let's not skimp. I propose a $100,000 loan from me to you. The only rider is I get a cheesecake on Thanksgiving, Christmas, and my birthday. What do you say?" She sat down hard. She slowly said, "I've been fighting for a loan 1/10 that size for 2 years. Now you just drop it into my lap with golden terms." "Why?" "Because I like your cheesecake, damn it. Let's go to the bank and set up the loan. Bring your ID." She walked out with a check, and I walked out with a promise of cheesecakes. I followed her back to the restaurant. I wanted to finish the rest of my slice of pie. While knocking back while savoring that pie and coffee, I asked the waitress where I should look in town for a live-in cook and housekeeper. She had no idea off the top of her head, but suggested that I talk to the local Methodist minister. I thought that it was a pretty good idea myself. The minister answered the door when I rang the bell to the rectory. He invited me in. I shook his hand and told me who I was. Using the hand he'd been shaking, he turned me partially around. "I don't see either a tail or wings. My congregation seems to be misinformed." I grinned and replied, "I do seem to polarize people, don't I? What can I do for you today?" "I'm looking for a live-in cook and housekeeper. If they've got small kids, all the better, as I've got over 400 acres of land for them to explore. I'm an ex-reenactor and have many skills to teach little ones." We sat and had coffee while he thought it over. Finally, he came to some sort of decision. "She isn't really a member of my flock, but I know of a young widow with 6-year-old twins that is having quite a bit of trouble. She's keeping body and soul together as a maid at the Marriott Hotel. Her name is Juliana Sims. Her kids are twins named Kim and Tim. I don't really think that she's making enough to live on. She won't take handouts, but she's a determined worker. If you wish, I'll write you an introduction and let you take it from there." "I'll take that introduction with thanks. I've got the money to spend helping others, so why not make my life easier in the process?" "Eh?" He grinned. "Finest kind." Now that was a down Mainer. I had a few tasks to accomplish before I had kinds running around the place. I paid a call on the local feedlot and arranged for a dozen bales of hay for bedding and 500 pounds of large breed puppy chow. I called 2 guys and a truck to replenish my cordwood supply and stock me up with 600 pounds of charcoal. I specified that all the fuel was to be laid on pallets or, in the case of the firewood, on 2x4 stretchers nailed together so that the supports were taller than wide. I'd probably be flushing dog poop off the floor and didn't want anything to be sitting in water. I also had the guys pick up the hay and feed from the feedlot. I'd have to build a bin for the feed so the dogs wouldn't get into it. Having another granary wouldn't hurt me. I asked my contractor to build me a granary room inside the first barn. Granaries aren't just built of wood and nails. They're lined with galvanized sheet metal with secure corners and flashing to keep rats and mice out of the room's contents. It takes a knowledgeable carpenter that had done it before to do a quick, clean job. I could probably lash one together with a hammer, punch, and a screw gun driving in a metric buttload of drywall screws. But why bother if the skilled labor was available and I had the cash to spend? I contracted for a locksmith to come out and put same-keyed locks on the lab, office, bedroom suite, bedrooms, and the conservatory doors. I'd give my live-in help access, but not the kids. There was too much trouble for them to get into. The locksmith clued me in as where to purchase a gun safe. I had it mounted in the corner of the office. I got electrical service run to the first barn, lights installed, as well as an LP gas-fired heater. It was time to get the puppies. I started with a litter of 8 German Shepherds. The vet gave them their shots and dosed them for worms. Once home, I spread 2 bales of hay inside their manger and got them bedded down. The first 2 nights I slept with them. Granted, I was in a sleeping bag, but they seemed a lot happier around me than not. In the morning, I got them fed, then peed in the small copse of trees near the barn that I wanted them to use. After eating myself, I walked around the place with them both following and leading me. We spent the day wandering the beaches, the fence line, and the barns. I fed them every morning and evening. After a week of this, I did the same for a litter of 7 Newfoundlands. At their rate of consumption, I realized that I'd be running out of puppy chow in short order. I got another 1,000 pounds on order. I looked around at my garden furniture. There wasn't much. I had an Adirondack chair that I'd brought from Illinois sitting in the conservatory. I got the name of the vendor off my chair, it was stamped into the wood, and ordered 3 more chairs and 2 Adirondack love seats. This would give us seating both in the conservatory and on the patio for Juliana, the kids, and myself. Once everything arrived, I'd get them put together, then spray paint them all with gloss enamel. That way they should hold up to the weather. I got one of those off-the-wall thoughts. Little boys and swimming pools. I talked to a pharmacist in town. He knew just what I needed and ordered a pint of a solution for me. I remembered what a little monster I had been like. I was ready for him. The locksmith was finished, the gun safe was installed, and, God help me, I thought I was ready. I contacted Juliana Sims and let her know that the minister had clued me in that she might be needing a better job. I offered to bring her out and look the place over. She said that she'd drive out that day, as Monday was her day off. I said bring the kids. I think I bulletproofed the place. An old Ford Taurus groaned its way up the drive. I greeted everyone with a smile and a wave. She was a blonde little thing, just like her kids. She was interested, but the kids didn't want to get out of the car. They were afraid of the dogs. They're only puppies. Here, hold out your hand. I got Tim to stick his hand out the window. He looked like he expected to haul back a bleeding stump. I think the dogs licked a week's worth of grime off his hand. He was grinning from ear to ear. Kim just had to get into the act as well. Soon they were in the grass, tumbling around with puppies half as big as they were. Juliana grinned. That's a big selling point right there. They've been whining for a puppy or a pony for the last 2 years. Let's show you around the inside. I opened the door and let her precede me inside. The ceiling height first grabs you. Next you look across the room, and you see a fireplace surrounded by couches and chairs. As you turn around, you see the high windows at the top of the front wall. To the right of the fireplace area was what definitely qualified as a library. The walls were lined with books. A big table with captain's chairs about it sat against the far wall. A set of stairs ran above the table to a loft space further into the west end of the building. At the other side of the fireplace lay a wide passageway back behind the big plinth supporting the fireplace. There the kitchen spread out, with its own table and chairs. A laundry mud room coat room lay between the kitchen and the garage. The other direction from the mud room held the master bedroom, the bathroom, 2 more bedrooms, the office, and the in-suite, which was reserved for the cook. French doors led to the conservatory, which took up the entire east end of the building. The front wall of the house, to the left of the conservatory doors, was covered in bookshelves mirroring the opposite end. There's not a lot of knickknacks to clean around. I've yet to get a good vacuum cleaner, but that's no problem. I've got a big pressure washer for the barns, and I'll have to get a small one for indoors. That should aid in keeping the floor clean. Let me show you the rooms. I led her through the bathroom, the master bedroom, 2 guest bedrooms, the lab, and the office. She noticed the gun safe in the office. Finally, we came to the cook's suite. It was built on a floor plan of 25 by 35 feet. It featured a large sitting room, a bedroom, and a spacious bathroom. If you wish, I'll have the carpenter that built this furniture work up a pair of bunk beds. They can be placed in either room, giving you some privacy if you wish. I'm prepared to have some other furniture made for the sitting room as well. I plan to have my reserve computer installed in here for your and your children's use. I turned towards the door. Let's go to the kitchen and talk contracts. We sat at the table. I'd picked up a notebook and pen from the office during the tour. I referred to the notebook as I talked. I'm prepared to offer $35,000 a year plus room and board, all 3 of you fully insured by me, and 2 weeks paid vacation per year. I'll pay on the 1st of every month with a 1099 at the end of the year. I'll pay all your auto expenses, including gas. Your responsibilities would be cleaning, laundry, cooking 5 days a week, and keeping a leash on your kids. She smiled at that. What? No hazard pay. Sorry, you own him, you beat him. Now, I couldn't help but noticing that your old Ford is on its last legs. I'm willing to buy you a new vehicle of your choice as a signing bonus. I looked out through the window. There's over 400 acres for the kids to run around in. That's on my side of the fence. I've had all the foundations and cellars that I've been able to find filled in with dirt, so the place is pretty safe. The dogs seem to have adopted them, so I don't have any fears in that respect. She nodded. I'd be a fool to turn you down. I have a chest of drawers I'd like to keep, some photo albums, and our clothes. The rest of our apartment contents is pretty much junk. I nodded. You might want to keep some rough stuff for the kids. I'll bet I'll have them camping in no time. I'll walk all 3 of you around the place. I've got an idea about FRS radios. I'd like for all four of us to carry one. Some models allow for a base station that can query any matching radio as to its GPS location. I can set up a GPS map overlaid on top of an aerial photo I had done this spring. That way you'll know where the kids are on the property at any time and can get hold of me if needed. You can call us in for dinner too. She grinned. It beat a dinner bell. I think I'd like a Ford F-150 four-door pickup. The kids still require child seats, and a four-door vehicle would make loading them in and out a lot easier. Good idea. Now for the nitty-gritty. How well do you cook? She put her fists on her hips and declared, I'm a mom. I can cook by definition. I took up the gauntlet. Roasts, stews, fish, venison, pork tenderloin, chops, bread, pies. She was beginning to look a little worried. I took her out to the bookshelves. I'm a cooking nut and had several sets of good step-by-step cookbooks, including most of the America's Test Kitchen set. I handed her Cover and Bake. With these, it's hard to screw up. I want you to do some reading, and we'll cook together for a month or so while you get used to my expectations. If you've got some favorite dishes, don't be afraid to try them out on me, either. Ever had cabbage rolls? Schnitzel? Sir Braden? Crock-pot pork tenderloin and condensed orange juice? I raised my head and dropped my voice. Come, daughter. Let me introduce you to the dark side. She grinned. I make a mean meatloaf, and I've got a navy bean soup that'll make you cry. Great. I like both. If you'll notice the furniture on the second fireplace, you'll get the idea that I like with smoked meat. You wouldn't be wrong. We can cook steaks and chops indoors, and that thing is rigged up to cook whole birds and legs of pork, lamb, or veal. I showed her the rotisserie. I think a quarter of the barn is used for storing firewood. We shook hands on the contract. I took a photocopy of her driver's license. After she left, I got busy setting up her employment, insurance, a household account with both our names on it, and made a note to get a spare gate opener and garage opener for her. I called the carpenter to get the furniture made. He was happy to get the business. I figured that if he was that happy for the work, he'd be short on cash for the lumber, so I wired half the agreed-upon price into his account. I used the internet to order the FRS radios, base station, and chargers. The next day, we bought her a new pickup in bright red. We used it to scavenge what she and the kids wanted from their ex-apartment. We got her moved in. I gave her a set of keys, and I called the contractors for the electronic openers. I had a beef stew cooking in a crock pot since that morning. I showed her how to use the mixer to make a couple loaves of bread. She took notes. We had beef stew, fresh bread and butter along with milk for supper. Good stuff. She cooked breakfast and lunch. I put in a food order that would fill a large chest freezer. I ordered the chest freezer too. That went in the garage so the dogs wouldn't be tempted to figure out the latch and eat themselves stupid. Speaking of the dogs, we spent a couple days paying them some attention. We walked all over my half of the island. I showed off both barns, the root cellar and the butchery smokehouse. The chicken house had been added to the second barn. It had heat, light, and water. I had a louvered exhaust fan put in to replace one window. It would kick on whenever the temperature inside the hen house reached 80 degrees. I ordered the grain, crushed shells, and Peeps baby chickens. Chicks. The Adirondack chair kits came in. I got busy with a screw gun putting them together. I spray painted everything white, which screwed up the barn floor a bit, but I didn't care. It was a barn, for God's sake. Half the chairs went into the conservatory and half into the backyard. The dogs had discovered the pass-through doors and chased each other all over hell. I used the tractor to spread the rotted peat over the proposed garden patch. The soil conditioner dug down over 14 inches to distribute the peat and aerate the soil. We planted the garden, including transplanting the tomato seedlings and setting the potato hills. Then I set the fence around the garden. The next time I went into town, I bought a bolt-action .22 LR rifle with a low-light scope and a brick of ammunition. I thought about what might be coming to dinner and bought a .22 WMR Magnum bolt-action rifle, again with a low-light scope. I have seen 40-pound raccoons. Last, I bought a couple pair of dark green coveralls and some scent-free detergent. It was time to go on dusk and dawn critter patrol. I got my fair share of rabbit, porcupine, raccoon, and opossum. I kept the porcupine to butcher and discarded the rest. The dogs fought over the carcasses. To butcher the porcupine, I used a propane torch to scorch the needles, and then used a pair of pliers to get down to the skin. From there, it was business as usual. I grilled the meat and thought it quite acceptable. I'd eat that ahead of a lot of other game meats. I'd eat raccoon if I had to, but it'd need a long-term stewing first. One morning, I was standing next to the second barn, looking around and trying to figure out what was missing. I looked at the mangers for the cattle, then out at the field. Shit, I forgot the fencing. Ah, crap. Fencing is laborious work that takes nothing but time, and more time. Screw it. I called the contractor. I had him fence an 8 acres of mixed-use land with 3-strand barbed wire. With all his other commitments, it would take about a month. The clover was filled in, and the grasses were up. It was time for the beef and the deer to be shipped in. This is how I spent most days. 4 o'clock, get up, get dressed, and watch the garden for critters until dawn. 6 o'clock, have breakfast, feed the dogs, take care of the chickens. 7 o'clock, wake up the kids and get them going. 8 o'clock, have a cup of coffee and a pastry. Read the paper online. 10 o'clock, watch the kids. Stop the end of the world. What a couple of drama queens. 12 o'clock, feed the kids lunch and eat myself. Clean the kids up. 2 o'clock, walk or drive around the property to get away from the kids. 5 o'clock, apologize to the kids for not being there for the end of life as we know it. Have dinner. 6 o'clock, do a little writing behind locked doors. 7 o'clock, scout the field for an hour. 8 o'clock, have a drink. Do more writing. 10 o'clock, go to bed. The kids were taking over my life. I was not Daddy Harvey or Uncle Harvey, damn it. The day of reckoning came about. It was a rainy day and everybody was stuck in the house. I was relaxing in the hot tub when the kids asked to come in as well. I said sure. Get in your bathing suits and come on in. I surreptitiously took a capful of the pint bottle the pharmacist had sold me and dumped it in the hot tub, then swirled it around. I leaned back to watch the fireworks. Sure enough, as soon as they crawled in, Tim got a goofy little look on his face. The water started turning orange. I stood up and went into full rant mode. Goddamn, you come into my home, take up all my time, blame me for not wiping your noses, and then you piss in my hot tub. I'm gonna hang you up by your ankles and beat you like a red-headed stepchild. Run. Ruin. They scorched out of there like I was shooting at him. I was draining the hot tub when Juliana came in to check out what all the commotion was about. They didn't really pee in the tub, did they? I pointed at the remaining orange water. Organic indicator I got from a pharmacist. Yep, he did, and grinned at me all the while, the little snot. Lady, your kids are out of control, and I'm tired of playing nursemaid to em. Either you get em under your thumb, or I'm gonna scare the stuffins out of em with the Shields Island ghost bear. She went back to their suite, hopefully to talk some sense into them. I didn't hold out much luck as 6-year-olds know everything. I spent the next day preparing my little ghostly exhibition. I'd found an old car fender at the campground. I cleaned the rust off of it, ran it over to flatten it out, and used a plow to make grizzly bear claw marks in it. Then I went to town to rent a couple of documentaries from the library. They were both on grizzly bear behavior and grizzly human interaction. The hardware store had a large boom box with a good bass register. I copied 3 tracks onto a CD from those documentaries. One had the sound of a grizzly snuffling at a window. One had the sound of a grizzly breaking into a pickup in which someone had left a Burger King wrapper on the seat. One was the roar of a territorial adult grizzly male pissed and standing on his hind legs. I was ready. All I needed was one more thoughtless action on the kid's part. 3 days later, a horse trailer showed up with 2 white-faced calves. As soon as the calves were down off the truck, the kids charged them, scaring the shit out of the poor things. They scrambled to get away and fell heavily onto their sides. I smacked both of the little shits on their butts and told them to get back to the house. They were howling and sniffling, but they went. I picked up the calves one at a time and laid them in their manger, then made much of them. They soon calmed and stood to start examining their new home. Soon they were running about the paddock, examining everything. I had planned to feed them over the winter and next summer, and have them butchered in the fall. This alternating year plan would possibly allow us to feed up and butcher beef and swine without having to feed both at one time, except for each fall before it froze. The first hard freeze is the sign to butcher. Mom tried to read me the riot act. That's when I told her what her little darlings had done as soon as they slipped her leash. She slumped, realizing that if this kept up, they'd have to leave. It seemed that Mom reinforced my little lesson. There were 2 very uncomfortable bottoms that evening at dinner. After we ate, I stood at the head of the table and peered at them. You have endangered the lives of 2 innocent animals on this place. Sometimes it happens that the island recognizes these things. If that comes to pass, I will fear for your lives. I'd be very careful for a while if I were you. When the deer come, you'd better have absolutely nothing to do with them. Do you understand? They nodded fearfully. If it's misty out, don't go outside. If it's dark out, don't go outside. If you hear the noises of some big critter, definitely don't go outside. Understand? Again, they nodded like crazy. That night, I went outside and howled with the dogs. In the morning, it looked like the kids hadn't slept much. Juliana gave me a look. The next night, I used some melted gelatin to make smears on their window that looked like a big animal's nose print. I played the recording just outside their window of a grizzly snuffling at a smokehouse. The next night, I played the sound effects of a grizzly demolishing a Subaru pickup. I quietly tacked that beat-up fender just under their window and tore the ground up beneath it. In the morning, I took them around to see the mess. I've never seen kids turn white before. Something wanted in. Something big. I thought they were going to throw up. The kids went back to bed to try and catch some sleep. I had my coffee at the kitchen table with Juliana. Now the ball's in your court. I have one more trick, but it might drive them over the edge. I don't want to do that. I wasn't bugged much after that. I noticed that they helped out more with the cleaning. They must have backslid once in a while as they didn't eat dinner at the table with us occasionally. When they misbehaved, they were sent to their room with a few books. Mom pulled the power cables to the computer and the TV. Life got a lot calmer around the place, at least for me. I had a frost-proof waterline run to the edge of the site I'd selected and prepared for a rendezvous. Near it was the area that I'd selected for an orchard. I'd hoped to kill two birds with one stone. Having taken stock of how much of my life was being consumed by the farming end of things, I desired to become a gentleman farmer with more emphasis on the gentleman than the farmer. I had a slab poured near the second barn sized for a 2-bedroom prefabricated house with an attached garage. I made certain that it was a high-end model, not trash that would fall apart in 5 years. I had it furnished, the kitchen supplied, and appropriate linens purchased for the place. I advertised for a younger farmer that had unfortunately trusted a bank, yet still wanted to farm. I had a list of 11 candidates. When I showed them around, most gave it up as a bad job. They just wanted to sit on a tractor. I had 2 men left to choose between. I showed them the list of tasks that I planned to finish within the next 2 years, such as replacing the barbed wire fence with a riven wood, or split rail fence, replanting the coppice woods, erecting and setting up a traditional early American barn, and getting the orchards operational. Only one of them wanted to get in there and get his hands dirty, Mark Sturm. He wasn't adverse to a few head of pigs either, and stated that if I didn't start a compost pile, I was a damned idiot. I hired him with the understanding that we had too few hands on the farm to support a dairy operation. I invited him up to my house for dinner and to look over the binder I'd produced while setting this place up, along with what it had cost. I promised him a capital budget if he could explain the long and short-term benefits of the outlay. I introduced him to the dogs and ordered him a gate opener, as well as a FRS radio and a charger. I set him up with an expense account and a debit card as well. My arrangement with him was much like Juliana's, $35,000 a year with room and board, full medical and 2 weeks off a year, payday the first of every month, all auto expenses covered including gas, and a 1099 at the end of the year. I'd taken shipment of the things left in storage with the law firm. They'd been sitting in the office waiting for me. There were 3 big steamer chests and 1 long box that for the life of me looked like a short coffin, but it was square instead of tapered. I'd been oiling the leather straps on the chests, hoping not to destroy them when they were opened. I looked at that long, black box and couldn't resist getting into it first. I got a hammer and a jimmy bar from the tool crib and started working my way around the lid. I tried to loosen it without damaging it or the contents. With a reluctant squeal, the nails came out of the wood and the lid came free. Within were 6 long lumps with an age-yellowed canvas shroud laid over all of them. I called Juliana and the kids in to witness the denouement. I carefully drew back the canvas, exposing 6 long arms and 3 small wooden boxes. None showed any sign of rust. Starting at one end, I carefully picked up each item, using a handkerchief between the weapon and my hand. The barrel was stamped Henry .44 RF. The plates covering the mechanism had a dull steel gray finish. Next to it lay an unusual round, leather-covered box with a shoulder strap, filled with empty metal frames featuring a tang on one end. Later, using the photographs I had taken, I identified it as an iron frame Henry. The next rifle had brass plates, with the barrel marked 1866 Winchester .44 RF. I recognized it as an early yellow boy, though I had never seen one chambered for a rimfire cartridge before. The third was labeled 1874 Sharps .45-70. Just behind the rear sight was a small nipple. It clicked in my mind when I saw the name Creedmoor on small wooden boxes nearby. I set the rifle down and opened one of the boxes. Inside were 3 range-marked hinged sights, each with a sliding peephole, one for short, medium, and long range. Another Sharps rifle was chambered in .50-90 caliber and also had a Creedmoor sight mount. The 5th rifle was marked 1865 Spencer .52. The last long arm wasn't a rifle. It was a Winchester 1893 pump-action shotgun. I looked over at my 3 witnesses. These were the weapons that either fought a bloody war between the states or killed most of the buffalo and drove the Indians west across the Great Plains. These appear to be original firearms. These are pieces of our history before you. Nobody should touch one without either wearing clean cotton gloves or, like I am, using a clean cotton handkerchief. I looked over at the chests. From what I'd seen so far, I had a feeling that their contents were going to be interesting. I photographed each long arm, taking care to record the butt plates, their sear cover plates, and their serial numbers, and then put them back in the chest, recovered them with their protective canvas shroud, and tapped the lid back into place. I want to get a desiccant pack and an oxygen getter in that case as soon as possible, as the seal had been broken. I called several local colleges and museums to try and get a team of paper and woven goods conservators down for at least a weekend to do a preliminary evaluation of what was in the trunks. I finally sent them copies of the pictures I'd taken of the long arms. I got 3 people down for a week. I bought several long banquet tables and bleached linen tablecloths to cover them in preparation for working with the chests. Juliana agreed to cook for all of us while the team was here if I'd give her comp time later. I had no problem with that. I made sure to have a copy of the contract handy so that these people couldn't claim that the contents of the chests were found and therefore somehow claimable through the courts. I didn't want to have to go out and buy a backhoe just to hide the evidence. I decided to be quite belligerent about claiming ownership of whatever we found. One snooty fellow started going on about the guest room furnishings being cunning fakes. I interrupted him by saying, "Modern reproductions, fool," and pointing him at the door. I didn't need that kind of person in my house. Some expert. He couldn't tell the difference between period, round-headed brass screws and modern, flat-headed stainless steel screws. Besides, that broke it down to 1 person per bed, which yielded a much more manageable solution. They had catalog cases of sprayers and chemicals to use in case the materials were brittle. We opened one chest and found it full of Civil War militaria. There were uniforms, camp gear, and what turned out to be a marksman's kit for clearing brush. I was amazed that the tarred canvas tarp was still somewhat flexible. A small journal made one conservator quite happy. It had within its pages the account of an eyewitness to the Battle of Shiloh from a sniper's point of view. The comments made in the journal matched the damage on one of the Sharps rifles within the wooden case. We had provenance of an authentic Civil War Union sniper's rifle. They took the militaria back to the big museum in Bangor for preservation and display. I got an itemized receipt for the property on loan. I kept an authenticated copy of the journal to keep with the firearms. The next chest had documents pertaining to the budgets, outlay, and income, as well as journals reflecting the day-to-day operation of the Shields Island estate starting just after the Civil War and ending abruptly at 1910 when it was all packed up and closeted away. There were many drawings of the buildings, the people at work, and proudly standing next to full root cellars and larders. I was right. They did not only farm with mules, but rode them too. It gave me ideas that I had to sit on, firmly. I had no right to believe that I could ride a mule and not get bucked off and stomped. I'd not grown up with them and knew them to be somewhat temperamental. Bullshit. They'd bite worse than a horse and drag you off their back. Then, reputedly, they'd step on your chest and look you in the eye. The third chest contained a full service of china, a case of solid silver tableware, various serving dishes and platters, several linen tablecloths, and a leaded crystal chandelier, all carefully packed away between sheets of newspaper from the time. I made plans to have the documentation and newspapers displayed at the greeting center for the pioneer village. The sheets of newspaper garnered more interest from them than the table service. I had the cabinet maker build a big sideboard with a glass front to display it all. I showed Juliana an old trick that I'd picked up. If you soak tarnished silver in hot water with aluminum foil and borax, the tarnish disappears, and the aluminum foil ages before your eyes. The dogs were doing a good job at keeping the roe deer out of the garden. One morning, however, I spotted a big standard buck that hadn't gotten the idea. I let him have it high in the neck with a .22 Magnum round, then once between the eyes. I hauled him off to the butchery and had him hung and bleeding out in minutes. I had the tarsal glands and genitals off quickly. Within 30 minutes I had it skinned, gutted, and cooling. Mark and the kids couldn't believe their eyes. I pulled out the tenderloins, quartered the carcass, broke it down into the major cuts, and had it all in salt within 2 hours. I hosed everything off and dumped the wheelbarrow full of offal out where Mark wanted to put the compost pile. I snagged the liver and heart for grilling. They had to be cut open and washed, and the liver had to be skinned before cooking. During the 16th and 17th centuries, puddings were bready concoctions usually containing organ meat and suet, sealed in a bag earlier, in a stomach or intestines, and boiled for several hours until done. Haggis is a pudding in this tradition. They were served with various sauces. The apple pudding called boiled cat, or boiled laundry, consumed with relish by soldiers of both sides of the Civil War, was closer to a dried apple pie than anything else, but it had quite a bit of flour in it and was boiled in floured cotton sacking. I read that they were sometimes seasoned with ginger snaps, a commonly available cookie of the day. With the venison, puddings, and perhaps coleslaw, I was well on my way to a reenactor's feast featuring authentic dishes. We could include pumpkin custards for dessert and various breads to be served with the meal. Pickled beef tongue was a delicacy, but I didn't know if I wanted to push modern people that far, unless they were Danish or backcountry European. Citrus was totally unavailable, but a ripe pear compote would be received with great pleasure. Small, old-breed turkeys would be welcome as well. Molasses baked beans were compatible with virtually any time period on the continent. There, we had our menu. I planned for a trial run fall of the year after next. We'd call it the Feast of the Hunter's Moon. I'd have to buy the turkeys in pairs, hopefully from local vendors. I'd be experimenting with the puddings and sauces for a bit to fine-tune the recipes. I needed to buy some crocks and start a test batch of sauerkraut, then work on a boiled dressing coleslaw. The slaw turned out to be ridiculously simple. I wasn't going to burden Juliana with any of this as it wasn't in her contract unless, of course, she showed some interest and wanted to play. I talked to the friends about cooperating on the build-out of the Pioneer Village. I'd like them to host the parking lot and the coordinating office, and perhaps a building or two where reenactors could demonstrate some of the simpler skills such as candle making, soap making, spinning, and weaving. I planned to pay for the build-outs, so I didn't expect much of a fight from them. These were barren old fields we were talking about, not the active bird nesting or feeding sites. I had yet to build the colonial kitchen and the blacksmithy. Once we started building the early American facilities, another barn would have to go up with wood and straw in place of concrete mangers. We could reserve the current barn for site maintenance and not allow visitors access. That would give us a place for our granaries, tractor, and implements. Mark talked me into buying a big hydraulic fence post drill with two heads. One was a standard 10-inch diameter. The other was 2 feet wide. It was for stirring compost piles and digging holes for tree root balls. We got our orchards in. I helped